na 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 na. Bamba. Oh na 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 na. Bamba. Oh na 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 na. Bamba. Oh na 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 na. Big it up. Oh na 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 na. Big it up. Oh na 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 na. Bamba. Bamba 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 de. Bamba bamba. Bamba mi de. Bamba 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 mi de. Bamba bamba. Bamba 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 mi de.
Welcome to Home and Away Jamaica, where we bring and connect Jamaica and the diaspora. Happy New Year to everyone and best wishes for 2021. As we normally try to do on this program, we bring guests on who are professionals in their respective capacity. And the primary objective is to simplify the either home buying process or home building process. And with that in mind, we strive to bring professionals who can guide particular areas and aspects of the process. So with me today, I have Mr. Gary Wright, commissioned land surveyor from the firm Kentish and Wright Land Surveying Services. Good day, if you don't mind, Gary, I'll call you Gary.
No problem at all, Mr. Taylor.
Yes. And Robert is fine.
yes, Mr. Robert.
So glad to have you. Gary, what I want to do is set the context. So many of our viewers and listeners are either purchasing real estate, selling. Many of our diaspora viewers in the UK in particular have aspirations to build on land and to engage in small real estate building projects in Jamaica. So what I'll do is set the context for the person who is selling or buying. And so in the agreement for sale of land, there is generally one or two provisions that speak to the need to undertake a survey. And so what we may find, there's one clause in the agreement that says that it's the purchaser's responsibility to undertake a survey and to satisfy him or herself as to the boundaries of the property. And then there's another clause, which is actually more common than the first, where a vendor, person selling, has an obligation to provide perfect title, a title that's free from any defects. And sometimes boundary or other discrepancies can cause a defect. So the agreement speaks to the purchaser's obligation to carry out any inspection that would be necessary to confirm that there are no such defects. And if they are required to notify the vendor within a specific time. So I'm just kind of extracting one of those instances where a surveyor may be relevant. But I'm going to open it out to you, Gary, to let our viewers and listeners know what are the general roles and responsibilities of a land surveyor.
Yes, the general role and responsibility of a land surveyor is to really convey what is there in respect to any property that a client has asked him to engage in. Because most of the times, even though you're representing a particular client, the surveyor has the responsibility to really truthfully express what is there on a professional level. You understand? It's not a case of just representing the client per se. It's to really express what is there. Is the land there? Are there any breaches? And the surveyor has that sole responsibility of reflecting exactly what is happening with respect to the property.
Good point. I want to ask you, there are two things. So one, I'm understanding that what you're saying is you're inspecting the land and you're determining if what's on ground, what is visible by your inspection and measurement correlates with what's on, say a title plan, the plan that was prepared in the issuance of the title. And that's how we determine
Yeah.
whether there are discrepancies.
Yeah, more often than not, that's the nature of the comparison. To see if this title is reflecting what is on ground, and we make that comparison and determine whether there are differences that to highlight. The title itself has its principle of being one of the principles has been mirror. Everything should be on that title, right? And the diagram is one such piece that you look at the diagram on the title and you should be satisfied that the acreage that is expressed there is the acreage on ground. But more often than not, that's not the case. And this is where the surveyor has to come in and make that kind of comparison that the title is saying X and the parcel is also saying X. And if it is not saying X, we express what is happening there.
Okay, you mentioned something that's very important, and just for practical purposes, identifying that the land actually exists. This may seem nefarious, but I have had circumstances, and particularly for land, raw land, I generally insist on a survey for any purchase with any of my clients, whether it's a cash purchase or a mortgage purchase. And I say cash because many times a purchaser, the bank imposes its requirement, but sometimes persons purchasing cash will say, no bank is involved, I don't want to go the route of that expense, but I always insist on it. And I've had 2 instances where we had a real estate agent waiting on a purchaser or waiting on the surveyor, and the land was, what was thought to be the land for sale was not the actual lot being sold.
Exactly. You don't want to end up purchasing the wrong lot. That's one of the main things in getting a surveyor to do your initial site inspection for you. Whether you're purchasing by mortgage or by cash, it's very important that you get a surveyor to make sure that the land that you're purchasing is the land that is on the title and in transaction, right? You don't want having a problem where most of the clients, for instance, they're interested in how much it is and so on, which is very important as well. But at the end of the day, the cost can be as high as ever, and it is the wrong lot, and the cost can be as low as ever, and it is the wrong lot. So you want to make sure that where you're not buying a post in a bag. You want to make sure that you are buying the right lot, and this is where the surveyor comes in and does his verification, does his checks, and make sure that it's the right lot you're purchasing. There are other issues in relation to properties, because sometimes there are other breaches, there are other matters concerning the property that you buying cash and not doing a survey report, that matter would not be highlighted. Whether there's an encroachment from a neighbor, right? Whether their building is on your property partially or wholly, or some fence not being in the right place, right? So you need to have your boundaries defined and you see what exactly you're purchasing. That is one of the main things that you need to know when you're purchasing a property, and the reason for getting a surveyor.
So what you're saying then, if the home ownership is a significant investment and a significant expense, and in undertaking such an investment or expense, it's incumbent on anyone to spend the resources to make sure that what they're getting is actually exists, and that there is no defect in that particular title. Because once title passes, there is no longer an obligation on the part of the person selling to correct these breaches. So many times we find in our experience, a cash purchaser purchased, but never did a survey. They're now selling, and now the new purchaser undertakes a survey and realizes that there have been breaches. And that person now selling, who neglected to undertake a survey, now has the expense of applying to modify these breaches.
Yes. And a lot of time we have heard persons saying that when they purchase a property I mean, they didn't have this kind of problem. Now that they're selling, they're having these kind of problems. If the inspections were done initially, chances are these problems would have been highlighted. And even surveyors themselves purchasing property. I was purchasing a property, and I did the inspection, and there is a tank on the property, right? And the seller is acting in a manner as if the tank is not a problem, but the tank constitute a third party interest. So these are some of the things that purchasers who perhaps would not necessarily be aware. Chances are it constitutes some amount of third party interest in the property, and some of the institutions like NHT and so on take great interest in these things, right? Is there somebody using this property to get to their property? This is very important to know when you're purchasing property.
No, absolutely. And I think what you'd raise with the tank is a very practical example. I had one client purchasing from abroad, and I insisted that they had someone inspect the land. Upon inspection, there was actually a telecommunications satellite on the land.
Oh, yes.
We've had instances where beachfront property have easements that benefit a third party going to a grave site or a burial ground, and without
Yes.
the survey, these things would not have been identified.
Yes. It's very important. I mean, even after you purchase say you purchase a property, an empty lot, and you're building, you need to get a surveyor to make sure that everything's remain in the context of what the title is saying, because the layman usually he doesn't go beyond seeing his name on the title. There are a lot of things on the title that will affect construction and development, and persons need to get the professionals to guide them to make sure that they don't put themselves in a bind where after building they're realizing that there are a lot of breaches and so on. So persons need to, when they're, even though they've purchased a property, did their survey, and if they're going to build a house on it, they need to get a surveyor to make sure all is well at the end of the day. Because you don't want to build and then realizing that there are some issues that will cause problem with liquidating the property at a later date.
Thank you, Gary. And it's clear to me from our discussion that a surveyor is an imperative for anyone venturing into land acquisition. And so, having raised some of those risks, I'm sure our listeners will be better apprised. Now, generally, without being, I'm not holding it to the point, but what range cost would someone expect in engaging a surveyor for some of these services?
Well, it's usually a percentage of the value of the property, for certain, and it depends on the nature of what they're doing, because a lot of time persons put surveyors in a nutshell in terms of what they do. There are several types of survey. There are topographic surveys that capture the contours of the land. You have boundary establishment to highlight and affix your boundaries, as well as there are surveyors report to determine where there are breaches. These are different types of survey, and they attract different costs. And the price and so on is a function of not only the size, it also encompasses the value. So it's really a case by case. There's no one figure per se. So it really depends on the parcel, where it is, the nature of the terrain, and so on. So, most of the time we do really ask person to contact the surveyor and discuss with them, and they will give them a price and so on where it relates to the property. Because it's really difficult to just give, one figure, and it really depends. Each parcel is unique. No parcel is at the same position, and usually some are in a different state than the other.
And I heard you mention something that I think is overlooked many times. The survey ID report is one report, and that confirms boundaries. but the topographic survey, particularly for persons building, particularly in the areas, would also be very important.
Useful, yes, indeed, indeed. Topographic surveys really is a reflection of what is on the property and the nature of the terrain. So if you're going to take on any form of development, and the architect, the designer, he wants to know what is there and how to really, handle the sewage, the water, the nature of the building and so on, what kind of footing they're gonna need and so on. So a topography survey now will highlight a lot of information that the designer would need, that the architect would need, how he's gonna design the road, and how is he going to design, where the pool should go and things like that. So it's very important such a survey will be undertaken before development.
Well, Gary, I want to.
And of course,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you wrap up. Wrap up.
Sometimes, yeah, man, it was piggybacking on the topography survey. The persons, they have the property for some time, and they go ahead and do the topo survey. And in doing that topo survey, sometimes it does highlight other issues where boundaries are concerned, because the topo survey does cap a boundary and show you where boundary lines are in terms of markers and so on. And of course, the surveyor would highlight that on his topographic map and so on.
Well, Gary, I want to thank you. I think we've squeezed in quite a bit in the few minutes we've spoken, but we've covered a lot of ground. And I think one of the most important things we've discerned from this is that never proceed without a survey, whether you're buying cash or otherwise. You don't want to be flying blind, or as we say in Jamaica, by pussing in bag. So
indeed. It
thanks,
was a pleasure.
Thanks again.
It was a pleasure. And I should tell you, there's a surveyor by the name of Robert Taylor as well.
Yes, from in St. Mary.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I drive by his office all the time.
I think it's Maypen.
But he must be an older man, because from I was a young, in my teens, I was told about him.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Gary. All the best to you. And thanks for coming on the program and sharing with our viewers. All the best.
Okay. No. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for having me. All right then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
TV. Bam bam. On the street. Bam bam. In the class. Bam bam. Then a preacher. Bam bam.